My name is Alara, and for the first 8 years of my life, I thought I was living a fairy tale. My mom, Evelyn, she was everything to me. Single parent, working her butt off, but always made sure I felt loved. We didn't have much, but what we had, we shared. She'd call me her little star, and I'd beam, thinking I was the center of her universe. We'd have these amazing Friday night movie nights, just the two of us huddled on the couch with a mountain of popcorn. I remember feeling so safe, so cherished. Then came my sister, Serafina. Serafina. Even the name sounds like she was destined for greatness, doesn't it? And in my mom's eyes, she was. From the moment they wheeled Evelyn and Serafina through the front door, the fairy tale ended. Serafina was, well, she was perfect. At least, according to everyone else. Picture this. A tiny cherub with a cascade of blonde curls and eyes the color of a summer sky. People would literally stop in the street to coo over her. My mom, well, she was absolutely obsessed. It wasn't subtle. Before, I was Alara, my little star. Now it was, Serafina needs this. And Serafina is so talented. And Serafina, Serafina, Serafina. It was a constant, never-ending refrain. Initially, I tried to be understanding. New baby, hormones raging, sleep deprivation. I figured it was a phase. I helped out as much as a kid could. Changed diapers, as much as my mom would let me anyway, which felt like not enough. I even gave up my favorite stuffed animal so Serafina could have something to snuggle. But the months stretched into years, and the phase never ended. If anything, it got worse. The attention I used to receive, the Friday movie nights, the little things that made me feel special, they all vanished. It felt like I'd become invisible. By the time Serafina was 3, I was basically her unpaid nanny. Evelyn would hand her off to me, saying she needed to rest or run errands, or, and this was the worst, do something for herself for once. As if taking care of her other child didn't count. My childhood was slowly being devoured. Weekends meant playing dress-up with Serafina, pushing her on the swing set, and cleaning up her endless messes. Homework became a struggle because I was constantly being interrupted. And my mom, she was always there, but always looking at Serafina. One day, when I was around 10, I overheard Evelyn talking to my Aunt Clara at a family barbecue. Clara was asking about the kids, how they were doing in school, the usual aunt stuff. And then Evelyn said it. Serafina is my second chance. I can finally do things right this time. My blood ran cold. A second chance. At what? What had I done wrong? Was I that much of a disappointment? The words echoed in my head, twisting and turning into a monstrous question. Was I her first mistake? I never confronted her directly. Part of me was terrified of the answer. But from that day on, I saw everything through a different lens. The subtle jabs, the dismissive glances, the constant comparisons. It all started to make sense. I wasn't just a daughter. I was a reminder of something Evelyn wanted to forget. I'll stop here for now. Let me know if you want me to continue. It gets darker. A lot darker. The second chance comment, it burrowed deep into my soul. I started seeing evidence everywhere to support it. Evelyn started actively excluding me from things. She stopped coming to my school plays, claiming she was too busy with Serafina's ballet lessons. She wouldn't help me with my homework anymore, saying I was old enough to figure it out myself. One afternoon, I was struggling with a particularly difficult math problem, and I finally broke down and asked her for help. She sighed, a dramatic, put-upon sigh, and said, Serafina deserves everything I couldn't give you, Alara. She has so much potential. You understand, don't you? I didn't understand. Not really. But I nodded anyway, because what else could I do? It felt like she was handing me a script, and I was forced to play my part. As Serafina got older, the dynamic shifted again. It wasn't just about Evelyn favoring her. It was about Serafina actively demanding special treatment. She was spoiled rotten, accustomed to getting whatever she wanted. And Evelyn, desperate to fulfill her second chance, obliged. We lived in a small 3-bedroom house. It wasn't luxurious, but it was home. Or it used to be. When Serafina turned 12, she decided she wanted her own room. I was 18 at the time, about to graduate high school. My room, the one I had grown up in, the one I had decorated with posters and cherished memories, suddenly became the obstacle to Serafina's happiness. Evelyn approached me one night, her voice unnaturally casual, as if she were discussing the weather. "Alara," she said, "you're 18 now. It's time for you to move out and make room for your sister." I actually laughed. I thought she was joking. A cruel, insensitive joke, but a joke nonetheless. She wasn't. Her face was dead serious. "Move out?" I stammered. "Where am I supposed to go? I have school. I have a part-time job. I can't just—" "You'll figure it out," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "It'll be good for you. Character building." Character building. Was that what she called kicking her own daughter out onto the street? It felt more like character assassination. She gave me 2 months. 2 months to pack up my entire life and find a place I could afford on my meager part-time salary. 2 months to sever the last remaining threads of connection to my family. Evelyn didn't offer to help. She didn't offer any words of comfort or support. She barely looked up as I carried the last box out the door. "This will be good for you," she repeated, her voice echoing in the empty house. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have savings. I didn't have anyone to turn to. All I had was a backpack full of clothes, a few $100s, and the crushing weight of my mother's disappointment. I know this is getting long, but I promise it's important. The next chapter is about finding my feet and realizing just how low things can get. Finding a place to live was a nightmare. I was working part-time at a local diner, barely making minimum wage. Rent in my hometown was already ridiculous, and finding something I could afford was next to impossible. I spent weeks scouring online ads, calling landlords, and enduring endless rejections. Finally, I found something. A tiny, cramped room in a shared apartment on the outskirts of town. It was basically a glorified closet, barely big enough for a twin bed and a small desk. The walls were paper thin, the bathroom was perpetually filthy, and my roommates were interesting to say the least. But it was all I could afford. The first night in that room, I sat on the edge of the bed, surrounded by cardboard boxes, and just cried. Everything I had ever known, everything I had ever taken for granted, was gone. I was alone, broke, and utterly terrified. The next few months were a blur of exhaustion and desperation. I picked up as many extra shifts as I could at the diner, working late nights and weekends. I ate ramen noodles for almost every meal. I walked everywhere to save money on bus fare. I was constantly tired, but I couldn't afford to slow down. If I missed a rent payment, I'd be out on the street. The fear of ending up homeless was a constant, gnawing anxiety. I remember lying in bed some nights, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Evelyn ever thought about me. Did she even care if I was okay? Did Serafina ever ask where I was? Did they even notice I was gone? The silence was deafening. No phone calls, no messages, not even a text. It was as if I had been completely erased from their lives. I tried to convince myself that I was better off without them, that I was stronger and more independent because of what had happened. But the truth was, I missed them. I missed my mom, even after everything she had done. I missed the feeling of belonging, of having a family, even if it was a flawed and dysfunctional one. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift at the diner, I was walking home in the pouring rain. I was soaked to the bone, my feet were aching, and my stomach was growling. I felt utterly defeated. As I trudged down the street, I saw a familiar figure standing under a streetlight. It was Mrs. Davison, my old neighbor from back home. She was Evelyn's age, and they used to be friends. "Alara," she said, her eyes widening in surprise. "Is that really you? What are you doing out here?" I hesitated, not wanting to explain my situation. "Just taking a walk," I mumbled. She looked at me with concern. "You look terrible, dear. Are you all right?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a little tired." She didn't believe me, of course. She knew something was wrong. "How's your mother?" she asked. "I haven't seen her in ages." My stomach clenched. "She's fine," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "She's busy." Mrs. Davison paused and then said, "I heard you moved out. I'm sorry to hear that, dear. You always seemed like such a good girl." Her words hit me harder than I expected. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged what Evelyn had done, the first time anyone had shown me any sympathy. I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. They streamed down my face, mingling with the rain. Mrs. Davison put her arm around me and gave me a hug. "It'll be all right, dear," she said. "You'll get through this. You're stronger than you think." Her kindness was a lifeline in that moment. It reminded me that I wasn't completely alone in the world, that even though my own mother had abandoned me, there were still people who cared. After that encounter, I knew I couldn't stay in that town any longer. Every street corner, every familiar face, was a painful reminder of what I had lost. I needed a fresh start, a clean slate. So, a few months after moving out, I made a drastic decision. I decided to move to New York City. It was a crazy, impulsive move, but I felt like I had nothing to lose. I had always dreamed of living in New York, of experiencing the energy and excitement of the city, and part of me wanted to prove that I could make it on my own, that I didn't need my family. I saved up every penny I could, sold most of my belongings, and bought a one-way bus ticket. I didn't tell Evelyn or Serafina. I just packed my bags and left. New York City, here I come. I arrived in the city with a suitcase full of clothes, a few $100s in my pocket, and a head full of dreams. The reality, as you can probably guess, was a lot less glamorous. New York was everything I imagined and nothing I expected. The city had this incredible energy, a constant buzz that made me feel alive. But it was also overwhelming, chaotic, and incredibly expensive. Finding a job was tough. Everyone was competing for the same entry-level positions. I applied everywhere: coffee shops, restaurants, retail stores, anything to make ends meet. Eventually, I landed 2 jobs. I worked at a coffee shop during the day and delivered food on a bicycle at night. It was grueling work, but it paid the bills. Barely. I found a tiny, cramped apartment in a rundown neighborhood in Queens. It was even smaller and shabbier than the room I had rented back home. But it was all I could afford. My days were a relentless cycle of work, sleep, and repeat. I'd wake up before sunrise, drag myself to the coffee shop, work all day, then switch gears and deliver food until late at night. I'd collapse into bed, exhausted, only to do it all over again the next day. It was brutal, but I didn't complain. I told myself it was the price of independence, the price of proving I wasn't a mistake. I was determined to make it on my own, to show everyone that I could succeed without my family's help. For a while, I convinced myself that I was okay, that I was strong and resilient and capable of anything. But the truth was, I was lonely. I missed having someone to talk to, someone to share my life with. I didn't talk to Evelyn or Serafina at all during that time. They didn't reach out to me, and I didn't see the point in trying. The silence between us had become a chasm, too wide to bridge. I tried to make friends at work, but it was difficult. Everyone was so focused on their own lives, their own struggles. I felt like an outsider, a ghost drifting through the city. One night, I was delivering food in the pouring rain, again. I was soaked to the bone, my hands were numb, and my bike was making a weird clicking noise. I was utterly miserable. As I rode down a dark street, a car suddenly swerved in front of me, cutting me off. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. I crashed into the side of the car, sending the food flying and sending me sprawling onto the pavement. I lay there for a moment, stunned and in pain. The driver of the car jumped out and rushed over to me. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I tried to sit up, but my ankle was throbbing. "I think I twisted my ankle," I said, wincing. The driver helped me to my feet and led me to the sidewalk. He was a young guy, maybe a few years older than me, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I didn't see you." He called an ambulance and I was taken to the nearest hospital. It turned out I had sprained my ankle pretty badly. The doctor told me I wouldn't be able to work for at least a week. I panicked. A week without work meant a week without pay. How was I going to pay my rent? How was I going to buy food? The driver, whose name was Liam, stayed with me at the hospital. He paid for my medical bills and offered to drive me back to my apartment. As we drove, I told him about my situation, about my family, about my struggles in the city. He listened patiently, without judgment. When we arrived at my apartment, he helped me inside and made me comfortable on the couch. He even went out and bought me some groceries. "You shouldn't be alone right now," he said. "I'll stay with you for a while if you want." I looked at him, surprised by his kindness. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I want to," he said. Everyone needs someone sometimes. Liam stayed with me for the next few days, helping me with errands, cooking meals, and just keeping me company. He was the first real friend I had made in New York City. His kindness reminded me that even in the darkest of times, there is still hope. That even when you feel completely alone, there are still people who care. But just when I started to feel like things were finally looking up, my phone rang. It was Evelyn. I stared at my phone as it rang, Evelyn's name flashing across the screen. My heart pounded in my chest. I hadn't spoken to her in over 2 years. What could she possibly want? Liam, sensing my unease, put his hand on my arm. "You don't have to answer it if you don't want to," he said. I hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and answered the phone. "Hello? Alara?" Evelyn's voice sounded hesitant, almost apologetic. "It's me." "I know," I said, my voice cold. "What do you want?" She paused and then said, "We need to talk." I rolled my eyes. "About what? The fact that you kicked me out and haven't bothered to contact me since?" "That's not fair, Alara," she said, her voice rising in anger. "I've been worried about you." "Oh, really?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "You have a funny way of showing it." "Look," she said, sighing, "I know we haven't been in touch, but we're having a family reunion next month. It would mean a lot if you could come." A family reunion? Seriously? After everything that had happened, she expected me to waltz back into their lives like nothing was wrong. "A family reunion," I repeated, incredulous. "Since when am I considered part of the family?" "Don't be like that, Alara," she said. "We all miss you. And Serafina has some big news she wants to share with everyone." Serafina? Of course, it was always about Serafina. I felt the familiar bitterness rising in my throat. "What kind of news?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "It's a surprise," she said. "You'll have to come to find out." I considered refusing, hanging up the phone and forgetting the whole conversation, but a part of me, a small foolish part, still longed for some kind of connection with my family. A part of me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, they had changed. "Okay," I said, against my better judgment. "I'll come." "Really?" Evelyn sounded genuinely surprised. "That's wonderful, Alara. We'll be so happy to see you." I doubted that, but I didn't say anything. "When is it?" I asked. She gave me the date and time and we hung up. I sat there for a long moment, staring at my phone, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. Liam put his arm around me. "What was that about?" he asked. I told him about the phone call, about the family reunion, about my doubts and fears. He listened patiently and then said, "You don't have to go if you don't want to. You owe them nothing." "I know," I said, "but I don't know. Maybe this is my chance to finally make things right. Maybe this is my chance to reconnect with my family." Liam sighed. "Just be careful, Alara," he said. "Don't let them hurt you again." I knew he was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to go. I had to see for myself if there was any hope for reconciliation. The next few weeks were filled with anxiety and anticipation. I couldn't stop thinking about the reunion, about what Serafina's big news could be, about what Evelyn really wanted. I confided in Liam, telling him about my past, about my fears, about my hopes. He was a constant source of support, reminding me that I was strong and capable and deserving of happiness. The day of the reunion finally arrived. I borrowed Liam's car, since mine was still in the shop after the accident, and drove back to my hometown. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was driving into a trap. As I pulled up to my childhood home, I felt a wave of conflicting emotions: nostalgia, sadness, anger, fear. They all swirled inside me, making me feel dizzy and disoriented. The house looked exactly the same as I remembered it. The same faded paint, the same overgrown garden, the same worn-out porch swing. But walking inside felt strange, like I was walking into someone else's life. Evelyn greeted me at the door with a quick, perfunctory hug. "Alara, dear, so good to see you," she said, her voice sounding strained and insincere. I forced a smile. "It's good to see you too, Mom," I said, but the words felt hollow. She led me into the living room, which was filled with relatives I hadn't seen in years. They all turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of curiosity and pity. "Look who's here!" Evelyn announced, her voice overly cheerful. "It's Alara, all the way from New York City." I mumbled a greeting and tried to blend into the background, but it was impossible. Everyone kept staring at me, whispering behind their hands. And then I saw her, Serafina. She was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by admirers, her face radiant with happiness. She was even more beautiful than I remembered. Her blonde hair cascaded down her shoulders, her blue eyes sparkled with joy, and her smile could light up a room. When she saw me, she rushed over and gave me a big hug. "Alara, I'm so glad you came," she said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. I hugged her back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was putting on an act, that her affection was superficial, designed to impress the others. Before I could say anything, Evelyn clapped her hands together and announced, "Everyone, can I have your attention, please? Serafina has something very special to share with all of you." Serafina stepped forward, beaming, and held up her left hand. On her finger, a large, sparkling diamond ring glittered in the light. "I'm getting married!" she announced, her voice filled with excitement. The room erupted in cheers and congratulations. Everyone rushed over to hug Serafina and admire her ring. Evelyn was practically in tears, gushing about how proud she was, and how Serafina's fiancé, a guy named Chad, was perfect for her. I stood there, clapping politely, feeling more out of place than ever. It was like I was watching a movie about a perfect family celebrating a perfect moment, and I was just an extra, a silent observer with no real connection to the story. After the initial excitement died down, Evelyn turned to me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We wanted you to be here for this, Alara," she said. "And, well, we could really use your help." I knew it. I knew there was a catch. I should have known that Evelyn wouldn't invite me back into their lives without wanting something in return. She led me into the kitchen, away from the celebrating crowd, and closed the door. "We're so happy for Serafina," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But weddings are expensive, you know." I nodded, bracing myself for what was coming. "They've already spent a lot on the engagement party," she continued, "and Serafina deserves a perfect wedding. It's just, we're a little short on cash right now." She looked at me expectantly. "And I know you've been working so hard in New York," she said. "We were hoping you could help out a little." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After 2 years of silence, after kicking me out and ignoring me, they wanted me to help pay for Serafina's wedding? "How much are we talking?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Oh, nothing too crazy," she said quickly. "Just a few thousand, maybe $7,000? That was everything I had managed to save from working 2 jobs in New York City. It was my safety net, my escape fund, my chance to build a better life. And she wanted me to give it all away, to spend it on a wedding I wasn't even sure I wanted to attend. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to admit that this was some kind of twisted joke. But she was serious. She actually thought I could, or would, just hand over $7,000 to help pay for Serafina's wedding. I wanted to say no, to tell her to find another way, to scream and shout and let out all the anger and resentment that had been building inside me for years. But something held me back. Maybe it was the lingering hope that helping out would finally make her see me as part of the family again. Maybe it was the way she looked at me, as if she expected me to prove myself, to earn her approval. "Let me think about it," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. The rest of the night was a blur. I sat through the reunion, watching everyone fuss over Serafina and Chad, feeling like a guest in my own family. I ate the food, made small talk, and tried to pretend that everything was normal. But inside, I was seething with anger and resentment. I felt used, manipulated, and utterly betrayed. When the reunion finally ended, I drove back to New York City, my mind racing. I had a decision to make, a decision that would determine the course of my future. The 4 days after the reunion were a blur of internal conflict. I paced my tiny apartment, argued with myself in the mirror, and weighed the pros and cons of giving Evelyn the money. Part of me, the logical, rational part, screamed at me to say no. It was my money. I had earned it through hard work and sacrifice. I needed it for my own future, for my own dreams. Giving it away would be foolish, irresponsible, and downright self-destructive. But another part of me, the emotional, insecure part, whispered that maybe this was my chance to finally earn Evelyn's love and approval. Maybe if I helped Serafina have her dream wedding, Evelyn would finally see me as worthy, as valuable, as part of the family. I knew it was a long shot. I knew that Evelyn had a pattern of prioritizing Serafina's happiness over mine, and that it was unlikely to change. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to try, that I had to do everything in my power to mend the broken pieces of my family. Liam saw how torn I was, how much the decision was weighing on me. He tried to offer advice, but he knew that ultimately, it was my choice. "Just do what you think is right, Alara," he said. "But don't let them take advantage of you. Don't let them make you feel guilty for putting yourself first." His words resonated with me, but they didn't make the decision any easier. Finally, after days of agonizing, I made up my mind. I would give Evelyn the money. It wasn't a rational decision, but it felt like the only decision I could make. I told myself that it was an investment in my family, an investment in my future happiness. I told myself that it would be worth it, even if it meant sacrificing my own dreams for a while. That weekend, I went to the bank and wired $7,000 to Evelyn's account. It was a surreal moment, watching the money disappear from my balance, knowing that it was gone, possibly forever. As I walked out of the bank, I felt a strange mix of relief and regret. Relief that the decision was finally made, that the internal conflict was over. Regret that I had sacrificed so much for a family that might never truly appreciate me. I tried to stay positive, to focus on the potential benefits of my decision. I imagined Evelyn thanking me, praising me, finally acknowledging my worth. I imagined Serafina inviting me to be a bridesmaid, including me in the wedding planning, treating me like a real sister. But deep down, I knew that those fantasies were unlikely to come true. I knew that Evelyn and Serafina had a way of disappointing me, of shattering my hopes and expectations. Still, I held on to the hope, however fragile, that this time would be different, that this time my sacrifice would be worth it. After I sent the money, I waited. I waited for a phone call, a text message, an email, anything to acknowledge my contribution. I waited for Evelyn to express her gratitude, to show me that she appreciated what I had done. Days went by, then a week, and nothing. The silence was deafening. I started to doubt my decision. Had I been a fool? Had I just thrown away my money for nothing? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know if Evelyn had even received the money. I picked up the phone and called her. The phone rang 3 times before Evelyn finally answered. She sounded rushed, distracted. "Hello?" she said, her voice barely audible. "Mom, it's me, Alara," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Oh, hi, Alara," she said, her tone indifferent. "What's up?" I took a deep breath and tried to keep my voice even. "I just wanted to see if you got the money I sent." There was a pause, and then she said, "Oh yeah, thanks for that. It's really going to help Serafina with everything." That was it. "No, I appreciate it. No, you didn't have to do that. No, I'm so proud of you." Just a quick, perfunctory thanks, and back to business. I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me, so strong that it almost knocked me off my feet. I had poured my heart and soul into this sacrifice, and all I got was a cold, impersonal acknowledgement. "You're welcome," I said, my voice flat. "Okay, well, I gotta go," she said. "I'm in the middle of something. Talk to you later." And then she hung up, just like that. I stood there, staring at the phone, feeling numb. I had expected Evelyn to be grateful, to be appreciative, to at least pretend to care. But she had shown me once again that I was nothing more than an afterthought in her life. I felt stupid, naive, and utterly heartbroken. I had emptied my savings to help them, and it hardly seemed to register. It was like I had thrown my money into a black hole, never to be seen or appreciated again. I wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out at someone, anyone, but I couldn't. I was too exhausted, too defeated. I crawled into bed and pulled the covers over my head, trying to shut out the world. I replayed the conversation in my mind, searching for some glimmer of hope, some sign that Evelyn actually cared. But there was nothing, just a cold, impersonal thank you and a quick dismissal. I lay there for hours, unable to sleep, wondering what I had done wrong. Why was I so unlovable? Why couldn't my own mother see my worth? I knew that I had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I had let my desire for acceptance and approval cloud my judgment, I had sacrificed my own happiness for a family that would never truly appreciate me, but it was too late. The money was gone, and the damage was done. I tried to put the bitterness aside, to tell myself that maybe this was just the beginning of something better. Maybe Evelyn would eventually come around, and we could finally have a real relationship. But deep down, I knew that it was just wishful thinking, that Evelyn was never going to change, and that I was never going to be good enough for her. Over the next few weeks, I heard bits and pieces of the wedding through Facebook posts and distant relatives. Serafina was going all out, designer dress, fancy venue, the works. It was clear that my $7,000 had gone directly into making her dream wedding a reality. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my own life, but it was impossible. Every post, every picture, was a painful reminder of my sacrifice, of my foolish hope that things could be different. And then, the final blow. I wasn't invited to the wedding. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Surely, after everything I had done, they wouldn't leave me out of the wedding. Surely, they wouldn't be that cruel. I told myself that the invitation must have gotten lost in the mail, or that they were planning a surprise for me. I clung to those flimsy excuses, desperate to avoid the truth. But deep down, I knew. I knew that I wasn't going to be invited, that I was still an outsider, an inconvenience, a reminder of something Evelyn wanted to forget. Finally, I couldn't take the uncertainty any longer. I picked up the phone and called Evelyn. She answered on the second ring, her voice sounding rushed and distracted. "Ilara, what's up?" "I was just wondering about the wedding," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I haven't received an invitation yet." There was a long pause, and then she said, "Oh, yeah, about that." My heart sank. I knew what was coming. "Well, it's a small wedding," she said, her voice sounding strained. "And Serafina and Chad wanted to keep it intimate. You understand, right?" I didn't understand. Not at all. I had given them everything. I had emptied my savings to help them. I had swallowed my pride and tried to be supportive. And this was how they repaid me? By excluding me from the most important event in Serafina's life. "So, you're not inviting me?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's not that we don't want you there," she said, her voice sounding defensive. It's complicated. Serafina has a lot of friends, and we can't invite everyone." "But I'm your daughter," I said, my voice rising in anger. "I'm Serafina's sister. How can you not invite me to her wedding?" "Please, Ilara, don't make this difficult," she said. "We're already stressed enough with the wedding planning. Can't you just be happy for Serafina?" I couldn't. I couldn't be happy for Serafina, not when I was being treated like this, not when I was being excluded from my own family. "I can't believe you're doing this," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "I can't believe you're so cruel." And then I hung up. I stood there, staring at the phone, trying to process what had just happened. They had taken my money, used it to pay for a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend, and didn't see anything wrong with it. I felt sick, betrayed, and utterly alone. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the realization that I still didn't matter, that no amount of sacrifice was going to change that. From that moment on, I decided I was done. Done trying to earn their approval, done pretending I was part of their family. They had made it clear where I stood, and I wasn't going to waste any more of my energy on them. I was done. The days following the phone call were a dark blur. The anger consumed me. The feeling of being used, of being completely worthless in my own mother's eyes, just ate away at me. It was a constant, throbbing pain that wouldn't let me sleep, wouldn't let me focus, wouldn't let me breathe. I replayed everything in my head over and over again. Every late night I'd worked, every shift I'd pulled, every corner I'd cut to save money. And for what? So my mom and Serafina could have their fairy tale wedding while I watched from the sidelines, an uninvited, unwanted guest in my own life. I tried to distract myself by throwing myself into work. Liam was incredibly supportive, picking up extra shifts for me when he could, just being there to listen when I needed to vent. He was a true friend, a lifeline in the storm that was raging inside me, but the bitterness followed me everywhere I went. I couldn't stop thinking about how easily I'd let them take advantage of me. It wasn't just the money, it was the principle. It was the fact that I'd let myself believe, even for a second, that helping them would mean anything, that it would somehow erase the years of neglect and favoritism. I unfollowed Serafina on social media. I couldn't stand the endless posts about counting down the days, the pictures of her trying on wedding dresses, the gushing captions about how blessed she was. Every smiling selfie felt like a slap in the face. I also stopped calling Evelyn, not that she seemed to notice. The silence between us grew, a vast, echoing emptiness that stretched across the miles. And for the first time, I didn't feel bad about it. If they didn't care enough to include me, then I wasn't going to chase them anymore. But the regret didn't go away. Every time I checked my bank balance, it hit me again. $7,000. That money could have gone towards a better apartment, towards paying off some of my debt. It could have been a safety net if something went wrong. Instead, it was gone. Spent on a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend. I thought about calling Evelyn and demanding the money back, but I knew it would be pointless. She'd probably guilt-trip me, accuse me of being selfish, remind me of how much Serafina deserved it. And I didn't have the energy for another fight. One night, as I sat in my tiny apartment eating instant ramen for the third time that week, I reached a breaking point. I couldn't keep living like this, trapped in a cycle of resentment and self-pity. I had to find a way to move on, to let go of the past, to build a future for myself. I didn't owe them anything anymore. I made a promise to myself that night. I was done with them. This time for good. The weeks turned into months, and I stuck with my decision to cut ties with my mom and Serafina. At first, it felt like I'd lost a part of myself, like I was severing a vital connection. But over time, I realized it was more like shedding dead weight, like finally freeing myself from a toxic relationship that had been holding me back for years. I began to focus on my own life, for the first time in years. I put in extra hours at work to rebuild my savings, slowly digging myself out of the financial hole I'd created. I started taking evening classes, pursuing my passion for art. I spent more time with Liam, strengthening our friendship and building a support system that was based on genuine care and respect. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I still lay awake, angry and hurt, replaying the past in my mind. There were moments when I missed my mom, when I longed for the family I had lost. But I told myself that I was moving forward, even if it didn't always feel like it. And then, out of the blue, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Serafina, can we talk?" The text from Serafina threw me for a loop. It had been months since I'd spoken to either her or my mom, and the silence had felt peaceful in a way. I'd finally started to carve out a life that was entirely mine, free from the constant pull of their drama. So seeing her name, well, her number, since I'd deleted her contact info, pop up on my phone screen was like a jolt of electricity. My first instinct was to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't seen it and let it fade away. But curiosity, that insidious little voice in the back of my head, got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I replied, "What's up?" Almost immediately, my phone rang. I hesitated for a second, took a deep breath, and answered. "Alara?" Her voice was tentative, almost shy. It was a far cry from the confident, self-assured Serafina I remembered. "Yeah, it's me," I said, my voice guarded. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she blurted out. "For everything. For the way we treated you, for taking your money, for not inviting you to the wedding. Everything." Her words took me by surprise. I honestly didn't know what to say. I had spent so long harboring resentment, replaying the past in my mind, that I hadn't even considered the possibility that Serafina might actually feel remorse. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she continued, her voice cracking with emotion. "But I just wanted you to know that I regret the way things turned out. I was so caught up in my own life, in planning the wedding and trying to be perfect, that I didn't even think about how my actions were affecting you." I remained silent, listening as she poured out her heart. I didn't know if she was being sincere or if this was some kind of setup for another favor. But for once, she sounded genuine. "I understand if you never want to speak to me again," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "but I just needed to say it. I needed you to know that I'm sorry." After a long pause, I finally spoke. "I appreciate you saying that, Serafina," I said, my voice still hesitant. "But I think it's best if we keep our distance, for both our sakes." I wasn't ready to forgive her, not yet. The wounds were still too fresh, the scars too deep. But at the same time, I didn't feel the same burning anger that I used to. Maybe time had softened me, or maybe I was just tired of holding on to the grudge. I understand, she said quietly. There was another long pause, and then she said, "So, how are you doing? Are you happy in New York?" I hesitated. Did she really care, or was she just making polite conversation? "I'm doing okay," I said cautiously. "I'm working hard, taking classes. I'm building a life for myself." "That's good," she said. "I'm glad to hear it." And then, after another moment of silence, she dropped the bomb. "Listen, Alara," she said, her voice suddenly changing, becoming more urgent. "There's something else I wanted to ask you." My heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. The other shoe was about to drop. "Chad and we're trying to buy a house," she said. "And the down payment is a little more than we expected. I was wondering if you could help us out again." I laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh, or even a sarcastic laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes from pure disbelief, from the utter absurdity of the situation. It was the laugh of someone who has been pushed to their absolute limit. "Are you serious, Serafina?" I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and amusement. "After everything that has happened, after you and Mom took my money and didn't even invite me to the wedding, you're asking me for more money?" "It's just a little bit," she said quickly, her voice pleading. "We'll pay you back, I promise. Chad got a promotion at work and we'll be able to make monthly payments. Please, Alara, we're desperate. We really want this house." I couldn't believe the audacity, the sheer entitlement. She had the nerve to call me, apologize, sort of, and then immediately ask me for another handout. It was like she thought I was a bottomless well of money and forgiveness, always ready to bail her out of her latest crisis. "You know what, Serafina?" I said, my voice rising in anger. "I'm done. I'm done with your excuses. I'm done with your sob stories, and I'm done with your requests for money. You and Mom have taken advantage of me for far too long, and I'm not going to let it happen again." "But Alara," she started to protest. I didn't let her finish. I hung up the phone, my hands shaking with rage. For a moment, I considered throwing my phone against the wall, shattering it into a million pieces. But I resisted the urge. I needed my phone. It was my connection to the world, my link to Liam and my friends, my tool for finding work. Instead, I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and tried to calm myself down. I couldn't let Serafina and Evelyn control me anymore. I couldn't let them dictate my emotions, my actions, my life. I had made a decision to cut ties with them, and I needed to stick to it. I needed to protect myself, to prioritize my own well-being. That phone call was a turning point for me. It was the moment when I finally realized that I had been waiting for them to change, to finally treat me like I mattered. But they never would. And for the first time, I was okay with that. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their love. I didn't need their money. All I needed was myself. I spent the rest of the evening with Liam, talking about what had happened. He listened patiently, offering words of encouragement and support. "You did the right thing, Alara," he said, squeezing my hand. "You stood up for yourself, and that's something to be proud of. Don't let them make you feel guilty for protecting yourself." His words helped to soothe my anger and reaffirm my decision. I knew that cutting ties with my family wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary, for my own sanity, for my own happiness. From that day forward, I resolved to focus on building a life that was entirely mine, free from the toxic influence of my mom and sister. I would work hard, pursue my dreams, and surround myself with people who loved and supported me for who I was, not for what I could give them. I was finally ready to move on. Months went by, and I kept my resolve to keep my distance. Life in New York was still hard, but at least it was mine. I no longer poured my energy into people who didn't deserve it. Work continued to be a grind, but I found small joys in my routine. The smell of freshly ground coffee in the morning, the smiles of my regular customers, the feeling of accomplishment after a long night of deliveries. I started making progress in my art classes, experimenting with different mediums and developing my own unique style. I even started selling some of my pieces online, earning a little extra money and gaining some much-needed confidence. Liam remained my steadfast companion, my confidant, my best friend. We explored the city together, discovered hidden gems in our neighborhood, and shared our hopes and dreams for the future. I realized that he was more than just a friend, that he was someone I could truly rely on, someone who loved me for who I was, flaws and all. Every once in a while, though, I'd wonder what was going on back home. I'd catch myself scrolling through Facebook, searching for updates on my mom and sister. But I always stopped myself, reminding myself that it was best to keep my distance. One night, while scrolling through social media, a bad habit I was trying to break, I came across a post from a mutual acquaintance. It was a picture of Serafina, out with friends, laughing and holding a glass of wine. She looked happy, carefree, and different. But something about the caption caught my eye. It was short and simple. Starting over and loving it. I frowned. Starting over. What did that mean? I clicked on her profile and scrolled through her recent posts. There was no sign of Chad, her husband. No lovey-dovey pictures, no anniversary celebrations, no mention of their dream house. Just a lot of vague posts about new beginnings and finding myself. A knot formed in my stomach. Something was definitely going on. I resisted the urge to reach out to Serafina, to ask her what was wrong, but the curiosity was too strong. I contacted a few mutual friends, casually inquiring about Serafina and Chad. It didn't take long to confirm my suspicions. Serafina and Chad were separated. They had divorced after less than a year of marriage. Apparently, they had rushed into things too quickly, fueled by the excitement of the wedding and the promise of a perfect future. But once the honeymoon period was over, the cracks started to show. They were incompatible, they argued constantly, and they couldn't agree on anything. The dream house had never materialized. They had maxed out their credit cards on the wedding, and they couldn't afford the down payment. They had ended up renting a small apartment, which only added to their stress and resentment. The whole thing had fallen apart, spectacularly and publicly. I should have felt sorry for them. I should have felt some sense of satisfaction, some vindication for all the pain they had caused me. But all I could think about was the money. $7,000, spent on a wedding that lasted all of 10 months. It was like pouring gasoline on my anger. The injustice of it all, the sheer wastefulness, made my blood boil. A small part of me thought it might be karma, that this was the universe's way of balancing the scales. But it didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. If anything, it just made me sad. Sad for Serafina, who had chased a dream that turned into a nightmare. Sad for Chad, who had been caught in the crossfire. And sad for the version of me that was naive enough to think they'd ever change. Still, I wasn't going to reach out. Serafina had made her choices, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into her mess. I had my own life to live. But life has a funny way of testing your limits. Just when you think you finally put the past behind you, it comes back to haunt you. Not long after the divorce news broke, I got another call from my mother. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello," I said, my voice guarded. "Alara?" Her voice was unusually soft, almost pleading. "Yeah, it's me," I said. "What do you want?" "Did you hear about Serafina?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yeah, I heard," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "She's having a really hard time," she said, ignoring my bluntness. "You know how she is. The divorce was devastating for her. She's been a mess ever since." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Here we go again, I thought. Serafina's in trouble, so it's Alara's job to fix it. "I thought maybe you could come home for a while," Evelyn continued, "to support her. She really needs you right now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything that had happened, after all the pain and disappointment, she still thought it was my job to pick up the pieces of Serafina's broken life. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not getting involved." "But Alara, she's your sister," Evelyn protested, as if that explained everything. "She needs her family right now." "Funny," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I don't remember being treated like family when you kicked me out, or when you took my life savings, or when you didn't invite me to her wedding." There was a long pause, and I could almost hear Evelyn's mind scrambling for a response. For the first time, I think she realized that I wasn't going to bend this time, that I wasn't going to let her manipulate me into doing what she wanted. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice sounding defeated. if that's the way you feel. It is, I said, my voice cold. Well, I just thought I'd ask, she said. I hope you're doing well, Ilara. I am, I said. Goodbye, Mom. And then I hung up. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the phone, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief that I had finally stood up for myself. Anger that Evelyn still expected me to put Serafina's needs ahead of my own. And a tinge of sadness for the family I had lost. But I knew that I had made the right decision. I couldn't keep sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of a family that didn't appreciate me. I had to protect myself, to prioritize my own well-being. And for once, I didn't feel guilty about putting myself first. Questions for you. Do you think Ilara is being too unforgiving towards her mother and sister? Is it ever your responsibility to help a family member, even if they have hurt you in the past? What do you think will happen to Serafina and Evelyn now that Ilara has refused to get involved? After that phone call, I expected some kind of fallout. Maybe a guilt trip, a tearful plea, or even a barrage of angry text messages. But nothing came. The silence was deafening, and I took it as a sign that they had finally understood that I was no longer their safety net. Every once in a while, I'd hear news about Serafina through the grapevine. She moved back in with my mom after the divorce, and from what I heard, things weren't going well. She'd quit her job and my mom was having trouble supporting them both. They were struggling financially and their relationship was strained. It wasn't my problem, but part of me couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Serafina had always been so confident, so sure of herself, and now she was lost and broken. I knew what it felt like to be in that position, to feel like you had no one to turn to. Still, I never reached out. I'd spent too many years putting her needs ahead of my own, and I wasn't about to fall back into that trap. Instead, I focused on building the life I'd always wanted. I continued to work hard at the coffee shop and on my deliveries, saving every penny I could. I poured my heart and soul into my art, experimenting with new techniques and exhibiting my work at local galleries. The first major milestone came when I finally saved enough money to move out of my cramped apartment and into a slightly larger one. It wasn't anything fancy, but it had a real kitchen, a decent-sized bathroom, and even a small balcony. It felt like a huge step forward, a symbol of my independence and self-reliance. For the first time, I could actually see a future for myself, one that didn't revolve around trying to please people who didn't care about me. I had goals, dreams, and a support system of friends who believed in me. And then, one night, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something told me to pick up. Hello? I said, my voice cautious. Hey, said a familiar voice. It was Serafina. I wasn't sure how I should feel. It had been so long since we'd spoken, and hearing her voice brought back a mix of emotions: anger, resentment, sadness, and a flicker of hope. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. For everything, for the way we treated you, for taking your money, for not inviting you to the wedding, everything. Her words took me by surprise. I didn't know if she was being sincere or if this was some kind of setup for another favor, but for once, she sounded genuinely remorseful. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she continued, but I just wanted you to know that I regret the way things turned out. I was so selfish, so focused on my own happiness, that I didn't see how much I was hurting you. I didn't say much. I wasn't sure if I could trust her, but at the same time, I didn't feel the same anger I used to. Maybe time had softened me, or maybe I was just tired of holding on to the grudge. I appreciate you saying that, I finally said, my voice quiet. But I think it's best if we keep our distance, for both our sakes. I needed to protect myself, to preserve the peace I had finally found. I couldn't risk being dragged back into her drama, even if she was being sincere. She didn't argue. She just said goodbye, and that was the last time we spoke. Looking back, I don't regret the way things turned out. It was painful, difficult, and often unfair, but I learned valuable lessons along the way. I learned the hard way that you can't force people to appreciate you no matter how much you give. That some people are simply incapable of seeing your worth. But I also learned that walking away isn't a weakness, it's a strength. That prioritizing your own well-being is not selfish, it's essential. The money I lost still hurts, but I gained something far more important: my independence, my self-respect, my freedom. And I'll always be grateful for that.